Well, for more on the economic fallout of the U.S. withdrawal from the Iran deal, let's bring in Farhad Alavi. Farhad is the managing partner of Akrivis Law Group, which focuses on international and domestic corporate matters and complex trade issues. Welcome to the show. Well, complex indeed. So by withdrawing from the Iran deal and with these additional economic sanctions on the way, how can businesses that are already invested here, what are they thinking right now?
Right. Well, I mean, obviously this administration's tendency has been to create disruption in these types of fields, and it's created quite a bit of havoc in areas, especially in markets like Iran, especially with this withdrawal that was announced yesterday. Now, with that, there has been a prescribed wind-down period, which will allow companies to wind down their activities with Iran, and that includes Airbus and Boeing. To what extent they have commenced transactions, I know Airbus has obviously delivered some planes already. If anything is being built right now, I presume these provisions would allow for those to be delivered and therefore not have to stop midway. The other added wrinkle in this is whether or not the European Union would be adding any or pushing for any kind of exemptions that would grandfather, for example, Airbus's agreement and allow it to continue. That's a big question, pointing to the fact that the Boeing CEO mentioned that he did not want disparate treatment of the two companies.
And then obviously a lot of competition involved there. And speaking of competition, of course, you can't speak about Iran without mentioning oil. We know that OPEC and other major oil producers have been keeping a lid on oil output, trying to boost oil output prices. So what does this decision then mean for the oil industry?
Well, it puts more pressure on the actual demand for oil by effectively reducing the supply that's in the market, because part of the sanctions that will be reinstated, which date back to the Obama administration, place limitations on the amount of oil that foreign third countries can purchase from Iran. In effect, in order to evade or at least prevent sanctions from being imposed on those countries, they have to agree to effectively limit their purchases of Iranian oil, which is what they did about 5 or 6 years ago when this law first went into place. With that, by effectively pushing Iranian oil out of the market, that will obviously put upward pressure on the prices.
Now, we know that oil and jetliners tend to get all the big headlines, but there are a lot of other businesses and sectors that Iran is responsible for. Tell us about some of the ones that we should be paying attention to.
Well, obviously, because of the fact that this deal did not have longevity really inherent in the way it was designed, meaning that it was always susceptible. Many companies, and because of inherent problems inside Iran, with respect to corruption, for example, or just not having the necessary requirements in place to facilitate investment, that prevented a lot of direct investment in terms of manufacturing, for example. But a lot of goods were being sold, as was indicated earlier. The scale of exports had increased notably. That also, another area in this respect has been professional services, for example, in fields like consulting or legal consulting, professional consulting. All these will be susceptible to this in many respects, and there was also a provision in this deal that enabled foreign subsidiaries of American companies to engage in certain business with Iran. And to that effect, some of them did begin into that area. That will all have to be curtailed.
Now, we've seen that a lot of countries have spoken up saying that they still want to go ahead with the deal, including several countries in the European Union and, of course, China. In fact, China's foreign ministry spokesman said that China would, quote, maintain communication with all parties and continue to protect and execute the agreement fully. So what does it mean for the deal as a whole if the U.S. pulls out, but you have so many other countries who still want to stay in?
Right. So the EU and effectively had its own quid pro quo, the activities that it agreed to do in exchange for the Iranian curtailment of the nuclear program. And those will obviously stay in place if the EU decides to do that, the EU trifecta. Now, the question, though, however, is that does not close out the issue of the United States' commitments under the JCPOA, meaning that the United States will no longer honor its commitments. Because of that, what that means is with the reimposition of these sanctions, there will be this constant looming threat of foreign companies, including European ones, being subject to punitive measures by the United States. Effectively, the analogy that was given was either do business with Iran or do business with the United States. In reality, what that really results is business with Iran versus business with the rest of the world. Because this American model of compliance and this adherence to U.S. standards, whether it's in banking or other forms of compliance, has become so pervasive, many companies do not want to risk it, even if what they're doing remains legal. And they follow the American lead, whereas this was not necessarily the case 10 or 15 years ago.
Now, former U.S. President Barack Obama, who was party to the deal, said that this risks, with the U.S. pulling out of other trade deals and now with the Iran nuclear deal, it risks the U.S. standing in the global trading community. What should trade partners be thinking when they see the U.S. pulling out of yet another deal? Absolutely.
The big issue here, beyond just Iran, is the fact that this does put American credibility under question. Will subsequent administrations honor existing trade deals or deals that are made in the current administration, and not just in the Trump administration, but its successor as well? You know, traditionally we have always kept our word on these types of agreements, and this is a very new trend in the U.S. politics, and perhaps a short-lived one, but nonetheless it does create instability and does call into question the ability, or at least the likelihood of the U.S. staying in any kind of agreement that it itself enters into.
Certainly a lot at stake. Thank you, of course, for your inputs. Farhad Alavi, Managing Partner of Akrivis Law Group.